I'm back! Hello again, my name's Stacey, I am a mess in a dress, and welcome to today's upload. I've taken a brief hiatus from uploading on YouTube just while I kind of got my head around what exactly I'm trying to do, what I'm trying to achieve here, because honestly it was all getting a bit on top of me and I was making loads of plans and then getting really behind and then getting frustrated that I was getting really behind, and it's silly. This is a hobby, this is meant to be fun, this is not a job, and no one is expecting anything of me, so it's silly to let myself get worked up about it. So I made the executive decision to scrap everything that I had filmed in March and April that was as of yet unedited and kind of just piling up on me and making me feel anxious, and we're starting again from today. So here we are. So one of the reasons that I got so overwhelmed with the amount of stuff that needed doing is because I read 56 books in April. You heard me correctly, 56. I mean, that's a record even for me, I have to say. I think I was on Easter holidays, so that helped, and I just kind of got into a bit of a zone and just kept reading. And if I'm honest, that was probably a few too many books for me, just because it was really hard to stay on top of them. It was really hard to remember them all. Some of them started to like blend into one book and I couldn't tell you what happened. And then when I was trying to go back and film and talk about these books, there were just so many that like plot lines and character names and everything were just starting to get all mushed up in my head. And it was a bit of a nightmare. So 56 is probably a bit too many. We may take it a little bit steadier from then on. But that just meant that like wrap-ups and stuff like that just became completely unmanageable and I lost the plot a bit. So I decided what I would do today is bring you my April highs and lows. So I've picked 10 books, 6 of which were absolute favourites for me. I thoroughly enjoyed them. They weren't the only good books I read in April by a long shot. There were so many, and if you want to kind of keep track on them all, then keep an eye on my Goodreads account or my Instagram, because I do talk about other books that I've read that I've really enjoyed. But these were kind of the ones that really stood out for me, that made an impact. And then I've also included 4 books that I really didn't like. And I know what you're thinking. Come on, Stacey, why are you telling me about books you really didn't like? I always said I wouldn't do negative reviews. I don't want to be someone who slates people. I'm not here to crush the dreams of aspiring authors or struggling authors or just hardworking authors who have spent their time crafting this piece of work that they're really proud of, and then I come along, little Miss Nobody from the UK, and say how rubbish it is. And that was never what I wanted to do, and that was never what I wanted this channel to be about. But having said that, I do feel like I give an awful lot of 4 and 5-star reviews. I am very positive generally about the romance genre. My bar is really low. I love romance. I love happy endings. So if you write a book with reasonably interesting characters with a reasonably satisfying happy ending, the chances are I'm gonna really enjoy it. So when I don't, something has gone wrong. And so the reason I wanted to include these books in my wrap-up is because I want to talk specifically about why they didn't work for me. And I want to just be clear, I'm not saying they're not good books. I'm not saying that there isn't an audience out there for them, because I firmly believe there probably is. It just wasn't me. And I just kind of want to show you as an audience, and potentially authors who are watching this wondering why something didn't work for me. I want to say what it was specifically that didn't gel for me, and also show that I am capable of criticising books, and I do find fault sometimes. And also just to prove that I'm not the kind of person who just throws 4 and 5-star reviews out without any thought behind them, and, you know, who never wants to say anything bad because, I don't know, I want free books or attention or something. That isn't the case. If you get a 4 or 5-star review from me, that's because I enjoyed it. If you get a 1 or 2-star, that's because I didn't. So high, low, high, low, high, low. So first up in my highs was, I actually read 2 books from a series that I've been reading for quite a while now, and this is Scentless. I can talk, really. And this was Senseless and Heartless from the Steel Demons MC romance series by Crystal Ash. I've been reading the series for a long time now. I quite remember when I first read the first one. It's a reverse harem series, so there is one heroine and multiple heroes. They are all in a completely consensual, understanding, accepting relationship, so the guys all know about the other guys and it's something that they all talk about before it initiates. And what I really liked about this series initially was I was expecting MCs, I was expecting motorcycles, I was expecting violence, I was expecting all the rest of it. It is so much more than that. This is a dystopian paranormal universe. There is definitely mysterious goings on that in the first book kind of come out of nowhere and are very, very unexplained. And you're just left as a reader to kind of learn a little bit more every single book. Meanwhile, our heroine joins this MC group, falls in love with one of the guys, and he then explains that in his culture where he comes from, it was very, very common for a woman to have multiple husbands. It was seen as a sign of respect to her, that she was allowed to have more than one husband. It was always in a very loving, nurturing environment. And so she ultimately ends up taking 3 other members of the MC as her husbands. And they all kind of coexist together in this really interesting dynamic between the 5 of them. I really, really enjoy it. So Senseless and Heartless are the 6th and 7th book in the series, I think. Not necessarily in that order. I always get the order mixed up. And they are books that mainly focus on the introduction of the final hero into the bunch. Shadow is a very, very traumatised hero. He has had a really, really rough background, mainly at the hands of women, so he's really, really untrusting of females, and that obviously initially impacts on his relationship with our heroine, which, if I can remember her name, Mariposa is her name, Mary for short. She has been drawn to Shadow for a really, really long time, but has had to be really kind of careful around him. They also had a bit of an incident very, very early on in the series where it could have gone very badly for both of them, but because she's such a just caring, lovely individual, she handled it so brilliantly. So we've been kind of being teased with the start of this relationship now for the last few books, and finally in book 6 and book 7 you see everything fall into place and their relationship their romance develops, and it is so adorable. Shadow is just the cutest individual because he is so caring of Mary, and he's so grateful and just kind of filled with wonder that she would be interested in him, that it just makes him the nicest, sweetest hero, even though on the outside he may look like the scariest, roughest, kind of intimidating person she's ever met. He's just so lovely. This is a dystopian universe, so a lot of the setups of what's going on in the towns around them is very Handmaid's Tale, very Hunger Games, very outside the realms of normal kind of Law and Order style here. We're in the Wild West, but with motorbikes, and it's gritty. There's a lot of action. There are some serious trigger warnings. There are some serious kind of violent, scary, dramatic moments, but I love it. I live for it. This is exactly my kind of book. The paranormal element just elevates it so much beyond where I was expecting it was going to take me, and it's just a series that I enjoy every single book I read, and at the end of every single book I want to know more. And I believe we have 2 books left in the series now, so I cannot wait to see how this is all going to wrap up, because man, it has been one exciting ride so far. So next up, as recommended by Tiffany from Neville and Pixie, this was something that I don't think I had ever really heard of before, and that was a historical MMF romance. So a relationship, a romance between one woman and 2 men. Apparently we're on a theme here of polyamorous relationships, but never mind, it happens that way sometimes, doesn't it? And that's not a setup you get very often. Obviously in historical kind of settings, culture was a lot less accepting to people who decided to go outside of what was considered normal. And so I imagine, although you definitely would have had threesome relationships or even bigger or whatever, relationships that didn't fit into the standard setup that you would expect, you probably didn't do it openly, because I imagine society would not have been particularly okay with that. I mean, they didn't have great opinions and great kind of reactions to lots of other more liberal ideals, so it seems like the kind of thing they wouldn't have been particularly accepting of. And I like the fact that Scandal really does deal with that. It deals with the fact that the relationship that these 3 people have is not going to be accepted, and it has to be kept secret, and it has to be done cautiously and with discretion. It's also just a fantastically gripping, amazing, interesting book. I mean, Tiffany, her recommendations are usually spot on for me. Like, if she likes it, I'm probably going to love it. I haven't found one I think she's recommended that I haven't loved yet. In this book, Catherine is finds herself in a bit of a sticky situation. She finds herself at risk of scandal and she needs to be rescued. Along comes the Duke of Hampshire, who agrees to marry her in a marriage of convenience. He is in a homosexual relationship, and it's not so much that she's there to cover up that relationship, it's just that he knows that she needs to be rescued, but she has been traumatised about marital relations, she's been traumatised about childbirth, and she definitely doesn't want to be forced into a traditional marriage. She has no interest in intimate relationships with men, and she just wants to be left alone. He knows that because he has a partner who he's involved with, that he doesn't need her to be a traditional wife. He doesn't have any expectations of her. He's not going to want an heir. And so he ultimately agrees to marry her just to protect her and keep her safe. And it is so adorably sweet. We then flash forward very quickly 2 years to now this marriage is established. They've been married for a very long time. They're kind of a power couple politically. She knows how to help him to achieve his goals in society and how to be the show wife, even if behind the scenes she's a lot more timid. But we see snippets of her interactions with the Duke and with Henry, his lover, and it is so just sweet. They're so protective of her. They obviously adore her, and they just are so caring and nurturing around her. And we also begin to realise that over time the relationship that they have has begun to develop and feelings have started to occur, both from the guys to her and from her to the guys.
Yay.
What are you doing?
My bear is playing downstairs.
Go and play them. And so basically their relationship begins to progress to another level where maybe they didn't expect it to from the beginning, and it is done so carefully and with such gentleness and so much affection from the gents. And I know people always say consent is sexy, but I read dark romance, so for me that isn't always the case, but it is 100% accurate in this case. The way that both men are constantly checking with Catherine that she's okay with where things are going and how things are going, and giving her umpteen opportunities to take a step back and to kind of say, no, that's too far for me. They just are so just lovely about everything. It is so steamy in places. I mean, just everything you would expect from a kind of multi-person relationship. And then some. I absolutely loved it. My only pretty big criticism of the entire book was the very, very end section. It just doesn't seem to end in a way that's satisfactory at all, either from the perspective of the relationship, or from some of the character elements, or indeed even from the kind of the overarching mystery plot that's going on as well. It just seemed very, very abrupt. And I know there is meant to be a second book, but it's really unclear whether that second book involves the same characters or whether it involves different characters, or whether we're going to see these characters again. And if that is the ending, then I am a little bit gutted, because this is a 5-star book as it rockets through this entire gripping plot right to the very last chapter, basically, where I was just left just gasping for more. So please, please, please tell me there is more, and we're going to see this couple get the proper happy ending that they deserve, because as it was, I just needed more from them. So an author that I am an absolutely huge fan of, that I do not hear spoken about enough, is Christy Caldwell. She is a historical fiction writer, historical romance writer, and I have read most of her books on Kindle Unlimited. She has done so many historical romances that it's insane. She wrote the Heart of the Duke series, which I absolutely love, and I'm actually currently doing a reading vlog where I'm reading all 16 books. It's taking me a while. She recently released a new series called The Wontons of Waverton, and number 1 was called Someone Wanton His Way Comes, and this book was so brilliant. This is peak Christy Caldwell. I believe from things she said in some of her dedications that she was inspired and kind of, mentored a little bit by Julia Quinn, and you can tell because the writing style, the pacing, the characterization, it's all there. It's just, I just absolutely adore books. They are so much fun. Someone Wanting His Way Comes is about a widow, Sylvia, who has had something of a disappointing marriage. She has discovered since her husband tragically died that he was carrying on an affair for a number of years. I believe he got his mistress with child, and basically what she thought was this loving, nurturing marriage wasn't. And she's deeply disappointed and now very mistrusting of men and relationships and all the rest of it. She decides to take two of her friends, one of whom happens to be the mistress. They've kind of bonded over their shared grief and their shared loss. And she decides to move them all into a house and make the most of her widowed status to basically avoid all of the trappings of society marriage that would normally be expected of women. She kind of, while she's there, manages to round up a flock of younger women who want to be taught how to avoid marriage. They want to not just go along with what society expects. They want to be free of kind of the expectations and the pressures of the marriage market. And they form a club, the Mismatched Society, all about teaching women how to avoid the perils of marriage and to avoid relationships with men who just don't deserve them, don't want them for the right reasons, and ultimately will not love or care for them. Along the way, one of her husband's friends, Clayton, is kind of tasked with taking down the society. All of the men of the town are getting fed up with all these women not being interested in marriage anymore and being constantly turned down and rejected, and so they send Clayton to infiltrate society. He's known Sylvia for a long time because he was very good friends with her husband, and he's there to try and undermine their work and to hopefully disband the group. Obviously, they fall in love as the story progresses. He's a true pining hero. He's been in love with Sylvia since before she was married, but just ultimately always felt left out, and obviously he knows a lot of secrets about this marriage. He actually fell out with her husband, I think the day he died, because he found out that he was actually going to leave her for the mistress. So he is uber protective of Sylvia, but he's also, you know, very cautious of seeming to chase his best friend's wife. It's just lovely. I love him. He's such a cute character. Sylvia is so fascinating. But the thing that ultimately made this book a complete 5-star is how open-minded the viewpoints are from the characters in this book. So initially, the Mismatched Society is that kind of hardcore feminist that some would describe as man-hating, or the kind of stereotypical feminism that people think where they just go there to berate men and to avoid them and to, you know, deny all knowledge of romance and affection. And that's fine, and it's funny and it's interesting, and it leads to some very interesting scenes with the other characters, some of whom will later get their own books. But what I really like about this is it eventually starts to question that, and some of the women in the group start going, but what happens if you want marriage? What happens if you still want romance? If you still want love? Does that make me less feminist? Does that make me less of a woman if I admit that I want to be in love? And shouldn't I not be trying to avoid marriage? I should just be trying to avoid the bad marriages. I should be trying to avoid the men who won't care for me and find the men who will. And ultimately, through the book, the society and what it's trying to do and its viewpoints of some of its members really starts to develop and to become much more open-minded and much more about what I personally is my kind of feminism, which is that every woman has to decide for herself what life she wants to lead, and she shouldn't make those decisions for any reasons other than her own. So it shouldn't be down to her parents or down to the men in her life or down to her friends who are trying to like lead her one way. It should be purely what she wants to do, and that is like true feminism, when you make your own mind up for yourself and you have the right to decide that, whether that's you want to follow the traditional path or whether you don't. That is your right to decide. And I really loved that the book went down that road, and just it wasn't one-dimensional, it wasn't one-sided, it was really in-depth, really well thought out, and really kind of had a great breadth of thought and emotion. I really loved that aspect of it. It completely won me over, and I've actually already read the second book in the series as an arc from NetGalley, but I'll be talking about that in my May wrap-up in a few days' time. So next up, in a completely different kind of vein of romance reading, is Lotus by Jennifer Hartman. Now, last month I read Still Beating by Jennifer Hartman, and man alive, that was without a doubt the darkest, the twistiest, the most scary, dark romance I have ever read. I said it was less dark romance, more horror story that has a romantic ending. It was properly traumatic, and but in like the best way. It was so good. My husband thought it was crazy. Like, he was hearing me talk about it going, what are you reading? But when I heard she was releasing another one, I couldn't resist giving it a try, and that book is Lotus. So Lotus tells the story of Oliver and Sydney, who are best friends when they're little, and Oliver is, one day he's kidnapped and he disappears, and Sydney and his brother and his family don't see him again for 22 years, and after 22 years he finally reappears. And this book is all about what's happened to him, where has he been, the impact that's had on his family, on Sydney, who was his best friend and has obviously had to come to terms with having lost him and never really knowing what happened to him. His brother has also been around as well, and just generally the impact it's had on kind of the community and the family, and ultimately the relationship between Oliver and Sydney as they start to reconnect after being apart for so long. This book, it's not as dark as Still Beating, I should say that. Still Beating is bizarrely twisted. Lotus is definitely dark. It deals with some really traumatic issues. It is deeply disturbing, upsetting in some ways, but the actual relationship between Oliver and Sydney is pretty just a survivor's story. It's kind of like a coming out of trauma and helping each other through it, and it's really, really beautiful. Oliver is he's quite a damaged hero. He's been away, literally shut away from the world for 22 years, so he's not really comfortable interacting with people. He is very kind of stilted in the way he deals with people. He doesn't really get how to be around everybody else and what's expected of him, and it's such a cool shock for him to be thrown into the real world and to expect to just get along with people. Sydney is so desperate to reconnect with him. She's missed him so much, but at the same time he is definitely not the little boy that disappeared. And also, as romantic and sexual feelings start to appear between the two of them, they're obviously both quite scared of those feelings. She obviously doesn't want him to just latch onto her because she's a figure of comfort for him, and because she's something familiar and something, I don't know, I think she just wants him to use her as a crutch, and he doesn't understand why she might be resistant to starting a relationship with him, other than because she just thinks he's weird and damaged and that she doesn't want anything to do with him. And it is so beautiful. It also has a really great mystery element to it, because there's the whole mystery of why Oliver was taken, who was he taken by, and that becomes a much different story to what I was expecting it to when I started the book. That is a really, really dark element, and there are some trigger warnings that you probably want to check out before you read the book, because it is really upsetting, some of the things that are uncovered as we go through the story. But it was incredibly gripping, just like Still Beating. I couldn't put it down. I read it in one sitting, and the ending I found really, really satisfactory and really, really just really uplifting, and really hope giving. After going through this kind of trauma, you could still have an ordinary life and still find kind of hope and peace and love with somebody else. It was just lovely, and I was really excited to find out that two of the characters that we've met in the first two books will eventually get there and happy ever after in the next book, so I will definitely be reading that one as well. So next up in my highs of April is a book that really, really challenged me in terms of how I rate books and how I review them, because this book was Day of the Duchess by Sarah MacLean, and this was the third book in the Scandal and Scoundrel series, and I'd really enjoyed the previous two in the series, but this one I'd been putting off, because we famously met the two characters in this book, Sarah and Malcolm, at the beginning of book one when he is cheating on her, and I don't do cheating in my romance novels. It's just a no. It's a no. I don't want to read about it. I don't find it romantic, even though I fully appreciate that in real life it is possible to overcome problems like this and to move on, and there are many, many multitude of reasons why people cheat, and it's not always straightforward. It's just not where I want. I'm a really kind of traditional, sappy, fairy tale romance person. I believe that in, like, you know, soulmates and fated mates, and once you've met that one person you have no interest in seeing everybody else. And although I don't necessarily believe in that in the real world, it's absolutely what I expect from my romance stories. So books like this I do tend to avoid, and if not for the fact that I'd read the first two and I'd already ordered this one, I wouldn't have touched this with a barge pole. Having said that, this book is fantastic. It is absolutely beautiful. It is one of the most genuinely beautifully crafted books I can ever remember reading. There are so many standout moments for me in this book, from Sarah appearing in Parliament to demand a divorce, to so many of the scenes in the house party when she's trying to find Malcolm a new wife. Malcolm is obviously not the villain that you would be led to believe from the first chapter of the first book. He has definite reasons for why he acted as he did, and more importantly, he deeply, deeply regrets those reasons and his actions, and he is full of grief and sorrow for the way his marriage has kind of devolved and fallen apart. This is a perfect example of a marriage on the rocks kind of story, in that both of the partners have made missteps, both of them have done things wrong. Both of them have hurt the other through their actions and their words and the way they've been. And ultimately, this story is about how they overcome those things and how they move back together. And it is so, so beautiful. It is still not a trope I'm particularly fond of. It's still one that I struggle with, and I struggle to enjoy in the same way I enjoy other tropes. But I cannot deny that this book is an absolutely flawless example of that trope, and the way it's written is so beautiful and so moving. And just the two characters, you just feel so much for them. They have been through so much together that you are absolutely rooting for them to work this out throughout the whole book. It was stunning. And this is why, as I was saying, it really challenged me, because if I went purely on a do I enjoy the tropes in this book, then no, I don't. But I was never going to, was I? I mean, that's like somebody saying, I rated this Mafia book a 2-star because I don't like Mafia books. You were never going to enjoy it. But I don't enjoy Marriage on the Rocks stories, I don't really enjoy second chance romance stories, and I really, really don't enjoy cheating in a romance novel. Having said that, this book is flawless. It is perfect. It is absolutely a 5-star. If those things are not a problem for you, if there's something you enjoy reading about, then you're going to flipping love this book. And I will probably never read it again, but I cannot deny that I'm glad I did. So I think it's really important when you read a book sometimes and you go to review it to remember, is this your personal preferences leading you to judge this book, or is it the content? And I can't deny that this content is fabulous. Oh, Sarah, no! She chose down. And last up in my highs for April is a book that literally everybody and their dog was talking about. Everybody was saying about how amazing this book was. Everybody was saying how this hero was the best hero in the whole world, and this book was like the best book ever. You have to read it. They weren't wrong. This is Lisa Clay Pass's Marrying Winterbourne. This is a story of Rhys and Helen, and I can be a bit contrary sometimes with reading. I sometimes don't want to read a book and enjoy it just because everybody else does. I like to form my own opinions, and I like to be my own person when I'm reading. I liked this book so freaking much. I mean, Cold Hearted Rake, book 1 in the series, is fine. It's okay. It's lovely. It feels like a big family drama as opposed to a 2-person romance, and I think that's why it struggles, is the romance between the primary couple in that book is maybe underdeveloped because they spend so much time developing everybody else. But that really pays off when you hit this book, because we are already invested in Rhys and Helen as a couple before we even step into this book, and then this book just builds on that and builds on that and builds on that, and it is so flipping amazing. Helen is such an interesting heroine because she is really timid and she seems really weak, but when she knows what she wants and she wants Rhys, she goes and she gets him. And I really, really liked that about her, and I really respected that for a heroine. But Rhys, let's be honest, this is Rhys's book, isn't it? He is just the most fabulous hero in all history. I like a dark hero. I like a gruff hero. And he is. But he isn't at the same time, because he never even considers mistreating Helen or being horrible to her, and he knows he's not really worthy of her, but he doesn't care, he's going to have her anyway because he wants her. And I love that about him, and I love how kind of determined he is to have her. I also really appreciate the fact that the conflict in this book isn't really a conflict for them two. They never really think they don't want to be together. There is never any doubt in their minds that they're going to end up together. It's just a lot of external stuff going on that's getting in their way, and I love the fact that that's all dealt with in a really kind of mature way. Rhys is just really confident in what he wants for them, and that he's not going to let anybody stand in their way and anybody convince him otherwise. This was just such an easy book to read. It just was so beautiful. There were so many highlights in this book. I couldn't even begin to list them all if I tried. I feel like I don't need to say a lot because I feel like everybody in the world has read this book and said how good it is already. I particularly loved the line towards the end when Rhys says that if you want a long, sensitive discussion about my feelings, I can't help you. I'm from North Wales, where we express ourselves by throwing rocks at trees. I mean, that is the kind of content from Rhys that just swept me off my feet. I was smitten. I love this book. This is going on my reread at least twice a year list because, it just gave me every single happy feeling you could possibly have. That is how to write a romance novel. So, that brings us to the lows of April. So first up, I actually filmed a rant about this book when I was sat in my car one day waiting to pick my kid up from dancing, and so rather than go through it all again, I'm going to insert that footage here. But basically this is Untethered by, I think it was M. Jameson, I feel like maybe. I really didn't like this book, and I'm going to hand over to Past Stacey, who is really not happy, to explain why.
But this was Untethered by, I think it's M. Jameson. And this was a dark romance, like a dark taboo romance. And the blurb is really, really vague. It's one of those ones where it tells you nothing about the book at all. It just kind of implies that the main characters, hate each other. And that's all you get. And you go in blind. And I didn't read anything about it. I didn't Goodreads it. I just started reading it. And it's a taboo romance, as I said. You have Flynn and Isabella. They're step brother and sister. They grew up together from, I think, when Flynn was about 10 and Isa was 8. And I think it would be fair to say I hated this book. Hated it. So this is one of those books where I really wish that maybe they had told me a little bit more about it than the blurb gave away, because I don't think I'd have touched this with the 10-foot barge pole. Honestly, I don't. So at the beginning of the book, Flynn and Isa really, really hate each other. As I said, they're step-siblings and they loathe each other. Like, in the first chapter, she keys his car. And I should probably warn you, if I haven't already, I'm going to spoil the shit out of this book while I rant about how much I hate it, because it made me... I can't remember the last time a book made me this angry. Like, honestly, angry. And there were moments when I honestly felt a little bit sick reading it, just because I could feel myself getting so upset at the plot and where it was going. And if it hadn't been an arc, I would definitely have DNF'd it. Like, but then also I got to 50-60% and just thought, well, I've come this far, I'm able to find out how it ends, and really wished I hadn't, because the ending did not get any better than the beginning. So Flynn is this really sexually liberal guy. He is very promiscuous, and by chapter 2 you have seen him have sex with literally everything that moved. Man, woman, he doesn't care. Him and his friends, I think there's 5 of them all together, are part of like a secret sex society, and they do like proper like virgin group orgy rituals in an old abandoned chapel in front of like an audience. It's fine. I mean, I don't have anything against that per se. I'm not a prude, but they very, very quickly drill into you that Flynn is very promiscuous. He is very much a free agent. He is the untethered one. He doesn't times of damn. There's no exclusivity here. You know, the friends are all having sex with each other, and there's no jealousy, there's no kind of problem with that. It's just very much free agents. Meanwhile, he is attracted to Isabella and she's attracted to him, and they kind of, you know, hate each other but still want to be with each other. And this is where it started to get, up until this point I kind of wasn't loving it, but I also wasn't actively against the plot. But from this point on, we're about 30-40% in, he is still sleeping with everything that moves while saying that he actually likes Isa and wants to be with her. Then he starts to kind of be a bit more involved with Isa, so he starts like sneaking into her bedroom at night and sometimes performing sex acts on her, and then will very often leave and go straight to the bed of somebody else, whether that's a man or woman, and he will have sex with somebody else to kind of get over Isa. And I don't know really. It left me so cold. It really did. Like at one point he literally says to her, I can't stop thinking about you no matter how many other words I sleep with, but he doesn't use the word sleep with. And I mean, isn't that just the most romantic thing you've ever heard in your whole life? I mean, what woman wouldn't want to hear that from a prospective partner? And I think that's my problem with this book, is it is on NetGalley kind of labelled an erotic dark romance, but there is not a shred of romance in this book at all. Not for a minute. Not one. So when we get to about 40-50%, he tells Isa that he can never be the man she wants because he wants so much more than she could possibly give him, and he is like a member of this group and they do things that she would never understand and she would never want to be part of. And she goes, well, show me. And he's like, I would want to share you with my friends and watch them be with you. And she's like, okay. And they go and have this like orgy experience in the chapel, in the hidden chapel, and which is fine. And there's definitely a way you could have written that scene. Like, there is a romantic way you could have written that scene where he was feeling like she couldn't accept him for who he really was. And it was this really uplifting, powerful moment when she goes, actually, I'm completely on board and I can go for this and I can take every part of you and accept you and, you know, love you, including all of your desires, not just in spite of them. That is not the way this book goes. That is not the way the author writes this scene with the orgy. So the orgy ends. They're all fine. They've all had a nice time. She tells him she loves him. And then you turn the page and it just says 10 years later. 10 years later. I mean, literally at this point I threw my phone across the room and just was like, I can't read this anymore. This book is dreadful. This book is horrific. But I'm 50% in and I kind of need to know where this car crash of a romance is going. So now we're 10 years in the future. She has a boyfriend who she is not committed to particularly because they're both a bit commitment phobic, but they are in love with each other, so it's working for them. And he is engaged to someone, but he's only engaged because it's like a business thing, and there's all manner of suddenly really important secretive reasons why he's engaged to this woman, and suddenly he's got like a almost vigilante style mystery he's trying to uncover, which wasn't really in the beginning of the book, but it's suddenly a big part of the end of the book, which was weird as well. And so they are now separated. Oh, and by the way, she has a daughter, a 10-year-old daughter, so I think we all know who Daddy is. And at this point it's like, are you just going to throw every trope you could think of at this book, like every single plot device you can think of, you are lobbing it at this book in the hope that it's going to make it good? And honestly, the main reason it's not good is because the core relationship between your two characters is horrible. Just horrible. So they eventually end up meeting together. He realizes he's the dad. He's still shagging her at every opportunity, but he's also still sleeping with his fiance. She's still sleeping with her fiance. I mean, it's not technically cheating because it's not exclusive and they're not committed to each other. But man alive, if I read a romance novel where 75 to 80% of the book they're having sex with somebody who isn't the main character, I just don't want to know. I just don't want to see it. It's just horrible. It's not romance. It's not sexy. It's not in any way comforting or woman fuzzy. It was just horrible. And then really, really, really quickly at the end, he decides actually he does want to be with her and he does love her, and hey, marry me instead. And she's like, but you're engaged. He's like, yeah, I don't care. I want to be with you. And they're married and they're happy and they've got a kid. And then the secretive subplot pops back up again for like a very brief second at the very, very end of the book. And it just goes, The end, brackets, for now. Book 2 coming soon. I would like to go on record and say, you couldn't pay me to read that second book. Like, there is not enough money on this planet to sit through that book again. The churning, gut-wrenching dread I felt for most of this book, just, wow. I can't think of any book in the history of the world that I want to read less than the second book in this series. And, you know, I've slated it, and I'm really sorry, because I've really slated it. And I should probably say, disclaimer, there's nothing wrong with the writing, the style, the pacing. It's fine. It's just the plot is so far from what I consider to be a romance plot that I can't even begin to describe it. Like, I know I've just ranted about it for ages, but seriously, I cannot satisfactorily express how just horrified I was reading this entire book. Genuinely just upsetting. And I'm sure there is an audience. There's an audience for everything. So I'm absolutely certain there is an audience out there somewhere who would enjoy this book and be like, this book is so cool. I don't even read the Goodreads reviews because I'll see some positive ones and I'll just want to cry. So I'm sure there is an audience, and if you're that audience, well, you now know what happens in the plot, but maybe you'll enjoy it. I am not the audience for this book. Like, I'm so far from the audience for this book. And I don't understand who the audience is. Possibly someone who doesn't like romance and doesn't like love. I mean, when he says right at the end that he loves her and that he wants to marry her, not his fiancée, who apparently we're just dumping very quickly. Oh yeah, and her boyfriend, it turns out there was some deep secret of his that meant that he had to confess to her and then leave. So he's out of the picture very quickly. And somebody says, you know, oh, well, Flynn in his own way, he does care for and look after her. Please don't ever look after me in this way. I mean, if this is your idea of love, I literally want no part of it. This is not love. There is not a single moment in this book when I would say that is love. It's just, it was horrifying. Like, genuinely, sitting here now thinking about it is making me upset and angry.
Told you I was angry. I still now, thinking about it, can feel the rage building. But we're going to leave it there. Enough about that one. So next up in my lows of April, we have a series of books, which I originally thought was a standalone. Then I thought it was a duet, and now I find out it's part of a trilogy, which is part of the reason why I was so frustrated. And if you follow me on Instagram, you may already have heard me ranting about this on my Instagram stories, because I was not happy. So this is the Falling series. Is that right? Yeah, this is the Falling series by Maya Hughes, and book 1 is The Art of Falling for You, and book 2 is The Sin of Kissing You. So this book is about Bay and Dare, and I guess my first problem stemmed when I realised that this is actually a second chance romance, because book 1 starts when they're adults and they are meeting up after not having seen each other for 4 years, and then we flash back to the beginning of high school and we see them meet for the first time, and we see them fall in love, and we see their relationship develop, and we ultimately see them fall out. What I didn't realise, and what really, really frustrated me, was that the end of the book is the moment we started the book, so you kind of go full circle. And I got to about like 98% and was like, this story isn't going to conclude, is it? Like, it's not going to wrap up. And it obviously doesn't, because there's a second book. So the book ends with them just having re-met when they're older. And so the whole first book feels a bit like a prologue. It's like a really extended prologue. We need to see the backstory, but rather than just intercutting it in the main story, we've had it all in one big chunk, which I guess is fine, but it meant I ended the first book feeling like I'd achieved nothing. I'd watched this couple fall in love and I'd watched them fall out, but I hadn't had a happily ever after. And I was left with this big cliffhanger. We're moving on to book 2. Another big problem I had was that Dare, the hero, has some quite serious issues regarding violence, and he has some serious anger management issues. And although many people try and tell him that these are issues, he never fully deals with them at all. And so ultimately the end conflict is all down to the final. And so the real end conflict is all basically down to his anger management issues and the fact that he cannot control his temper in certain circumstances. And although definitely Bay is far from perfect, and she does maybe act in a way that isn't the best considering today's history, ultimately he acts in a way that ends with the relationship dissolving They go their separate ways. They meet 4 years later. We're at the end of book 1. So I was annoyed. I was frustrated. But I wanted to know what happened. So I picked up book 2, assuming, incorrectly, that this was a duet. And we enter book 2. And we see them meet up. And we see them work through some of the stuff that has happened in book 1. And we ultimately see them reunite. And then we get to about 98% of book 2. And all of the issues from book 1, all of Dear's anger management stuff, has clearly still not been dealt with in any meaningful way. He is still as quick to fire up as he was at this first book. And you guessed it, we have another big falling out. There's another big conflict, very, very, very similar to the first one, and ultimately the couple end up breaking up again. And I realise with distinct horror that once again I'm not going to get happy ever after. This book is not wrapping up, and shock, there is a 3rd book in the series. So now I'm left feeling like I've read 2 whole books, I've spent hours of my time, and I have got nowhere. I feel I am no further along with this couple than I was when we initially started. And that for me is so frustrating. Like, a romance story, any story really, is only as good as its ending. And I haven't had the ending. So I have kind of provisionally rated this as a 3-star on my Goodreads because I didn't massively enjoy the characters, I didn't massively enjoy the plots, and the conflict, the repetitive nature of it just hacked me off. I kind of felt like if you're going to make all the same mistakes in your second chance, don't even attempt it. And now basically in book 3 we're in 3rd chance romance territory, which is literally one of my least favourite tropes of all time. Ever. Hate it. I haven't read the 3rd book yet. I'm honestly not sure if it's even out yet, and I don't know if I'm going to read it. I did not enjoy either of these first 2 books, so I don't know if I'm going to even be bothered to pick it up. I know some people really enjoy this kind of long, drawn-out, angsty relationships. I really don't. I'm kind of on the fence as to whether or not I'm even going to read the end of the series. I kind of want to know what happens. If anyone can just like spoiler it, DM me and tell me how it ends, because I'm not sure I've got 2 hours of my life to waste reading this next book. So another book that absolutely frustrated the living hell out of me was Legally Yours by Nicole French. So this book had such an interesting start. It was so promising when we began, and I think that's probably one of the reasons I was so frustrated, is because it just did not deliver the results that I wanted. I think most of my frustrations came from the main character of the heroine, Skylar. She meets a billionaire, she's in his living room, and he is completely besotted with her, and he starts to pursue her. And I cannot even remember why now. I'm sure there's a backstory reason somewhere tucked in there, but she's really wary of rich men and their gifts, which I get. I get. And I get that she tries to encourage him to stop throwing money around and to stop trying to impress her with big, grand gestures. But at the same time, let the billionaire spend some money on you. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like he's gonna notice. So I can understand when she doesn't want taking to fancy restaurants and she doesn't want to be flown to Paris for dinner. She just wants to be dated normally. And so that was kind of fine. But by the end of the book, they are now allegedly in a relationship. He is now her boyfriend. And she ends up in a spot of financial difficulty, and she could really, really, really use some help. And she still gets angry at him whenever he tries to help her. And she still is so kind of battling against the fact that he's rich. And you go, but if you are a couple, then you are a couple, you are a team, and you support each other in whatever way you can. That might be emotional, that might be financial. That's fine, that's part of being in a relationship. If one of you needs help, the other one steps in. That's not him trying to rule you or buy you or, possess you. That's what a boyfriend does. My husband, when we were younger, he dug me out of some financial stuff that I needed help with because I couldn't do it myself. And that's, and then I paid him back and it was all great. Now, I support him in other ways. It's just that's a relationship. You lift each other up and you help each other out. And she is so resistant to that it really frustrated me. And then to add insult to injury, there is a twist right near the end of the book which comes out of nowhere, and it's simultaneously a huge deal and not a huge deal, because I kind of feel like she massively overreacts in the way she takes it. Why he hasn't told her this information previously, I don't know. I just thought it was just It just felt really out of the blue, unsatisfying, and it left the couple in a position at the end of the book where obviously this is meant to be part of the series, obviously we're meant to want to read the next book to find out what happens with this couple, but I just don't. I did not like her enough. I was not interested in their relationship enough, and ultimately everything about this book left me feeling a little bit deflated. So I very much doubt I'll be picking up book 2 unless I'm one day stuck on a desert island with literally nothing else to read, and then maybe I would. Maybe. And the last book that just did not meet the mark for me in April was A Beauty, Dark and Deadly by Heather C. Myers. This book is penned as a dark romance, maybe a bit of a Beauty and the Beast retelling. The cover's great, like the cover's ace. And I was really, really excited when I found this. I think I found it in like a free offer on Kindle and I was like, fantastic, can't wait to read it. Sadly, it just didn't do it for me at all. To begin with, in some places, the writing felt a little bit weird. Like, I picked up really early on that the author kept saying, the young woman said this, or the young woman did that, when referring to the heroine who we already knew her name and we already knew her as a character. That's usually done when you don't know the person or when you haven't been introduced to the character yet. So it just felt really weird, and it kind of popped up multiple times throughout the first few chapters. For me, that felt really, really jarring. I don't know why. It just instantly kind of pulled me out of the mood and threw me off a bit. It was a writing style choice. I'm sure it didn't bother a lot of people, but for me it just instantly kind of flagged as going, this is a bit weird. And then we get to the actual relationship. So basically Emmy goes to work as a maid for Jason, who is a recluse. He is a writer, I believe. And he is best known because he was accused of murdering his wife and her lover. And everybody warns her about going to work, that everybody says that, you know, he's dangerous, it's a scary place to go, and she goes there, and he is very standoffish, but they very, very soon begin forming a friendship, and they form a relationship, and they grow together. Every time she goes down to the village, town, wherever where they live, people are really kind of dismissive of her. They won't talk to her because of who she works and because of the kind of reputation of the place, and generally like the two of them are ostracised, and they eventually start falling in love. The romance itself, the relationship, the story is a little bit meh, if I'm honest. It didn't excite me, it didn't grab me, it felt underdeveloped, and it felt very rushed. The ending is where my problems really started, because you see them officially start their relationship. They go and speak to her grandfather to kind of get his blessing. He gives the hero a bit of a talking to. I am going to put a spoiler warning here because I'm going to go and spoil the end of this book. I can't talk about what I didn't like about it without spoiling the book. But basically they go and talk to the grandfather kind of goes, you will look after her, you'll be careful with that, and they go, yep, that's fine. They don't really even have a big I love you moment, a big kind of happily ever after reveal moment. There's no big climax to the romance, as it were. And then it goes epilogue, and we enter what I presume is the end of the story. And first up, they go down to town, and the epilogue tells us that because he started going into town a bit more, everyone just forgives him. Everyone likes him now, it's fine. They can go into town and just hang out, it's cool. Which is really weird, because the entire book he's been ostracised, nobody hates him because he allegedly murdered his wife and child. His work, because he allegedly murdered his wife and her lover. But that's all forgiven now, it's fine. And then a character who was kind of floating around for most of the book comes and threatens our heroine. Bear in mind, we are in the epilogue at this point, with the actual epilogue of the story, not like the last chapter, the epilogue. A character turns up who hasn't been around for ages, threatens the heroine, tries to attack her, and she murders him, kills him, accidentally. The hero turns up, finds her with the body, and offers to rescue her, to kind of help her to cover it all up, because she's worried about what people will think if they find a body up here, how are they going to explain it, she's going to get into trouble. And then, right at the very end of the book, like the final line, paragraph, whatever you want to call it, the hero just turns to the heroine and goes, it's okay, I've done this before. Dum, dum, dum. Cue the EastEnders theme tune begins as we enter this big tense dramatic moment at the end of the epilogue. I assume the suggestion there is that he did in fact murder his wife and lover, and he has covered up the murder before, and he has gotten away with it, and we're meant to end the book going, oh, shock, thrill, amazing, what a twist. You don't give me a twist at the end of the epilogue. I'm not interested in twists at the end of the epilogue. I'm interested in happy ever after, kissing, smooching and running off into the sunset. What the living daylights. I frantically skipped through to see if this was going to be another book that ended up being part of a series, and as far as I can tell it isn't. There is a second book, but that appears to be a completely different couple. So I don't know what that ending was. And maybe there were some people who read that and thought that was like the most creative, artistic way. But for me, it was that kind of emotional equivalent of, and it was all a dream. It was that kind of ending. It was so dissatisfying. I was so fed up. I think I read this almost straight after Legally Yours, so by now I was just so hacked off with reading books with disappointing endings, and this just added insult to injury. Whew, I can feel myself getting revved up again. So there you have it. These are the kind of things that are going to turn me off a book. This is the kind of thing that's going to really rile me up and leave me leaving like a really bad review. Sorry. And now I feel like I'm ending this on a negative note. Oh well, there's no avoiding it. Hopefully you enjoyed hearing about some of my highs and lows in April. We'll be back to some regular wrap-ups in May, and I'll be back again soon with another video. Thank you very much. Make sure to subscribe for new content, and I will see you all soon.